Well, the Unstuck Church Report includes benchmarks and trends in four different categories. One is ministry reach, the second is ministry connection, third is ministry staffing and leadership, and fourth is ministry finances. So let's start our conversation today with ministry reach. Tony, what are some of the key data trends that stood out to you in this area of ministry reach?
Well, let's start with attendance, in-person attendance. And here, when we looked at year-over-year data, the average in-person attendance dropped by 28% over the previous 12 months. And again, just to highlight, this is post-pandemic. So this is a decline that is still happening year over year in the middle of the pandemic, not comparing to pre-COVID days.
Right.
But and by the way, that is a tick better than we saw a quarter in the previous quarter's report. But that decline in attendance is no longer being offset by an increase in online service views. And the reason I say that is the current report is showing the average number of weekly online service views has actually gone down more than 15% year over year. And so this is the first time we've seen both in-person attendance going down,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the first time we've seen online engagement go down as well. And it kind of makes sense that online views are going down because for some of these churches, they're comparing online engagement to the early days of COVID when everyone was forced to be online.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, we assumed that people who were watching online would eventually come back to in-person services. In other words, online views would go down, but in-person attendance would start to go up. And unfortunately, here we are more than 2 years since the original COVID lockdowns, and that turnaround in in-person attendance still isn't happening. In fact, now both in-person attendance and online engagement are now declining in the average churches that we're looking at.
Well, that kind of brings me down. Any signs of hope in the data there, Tony?
Yeah. I mean, the good news is, I mean, when you dig into the actual numbers and start to look at the specific churches, we're starting to see several churches that are experiencing growth again. In fact, two out of five churches that we looked at for this quarter's report are now seeing year over year attendance growth. So that's a good sign. One good example of this, Quest Church near Augusta, Georgia. I was actually just on site working with the team at Quest. John Kenny is their senior pastor, and their attendance has increased 50% in the last 12 months. So they've, and by the way, they've more than doubled too the number of new people that they're tracking in their database. So here it's just, they actually have a name and they have contact information for the people that they're tracking in their database. And, you know, hard to say if that's the only factor, I doubt it. But by having more intentionality about engaging new people,
Mm-hmm.
they are also seeing increases in Sunday morning in-person attendance too. So related to this, I asked John, the senior pastor, if he sensed there was a correlation between the church's intentionality about connecting with new people and the attendance growth that they've experienced in the last year. And John said that they know that in order to grow, Quest Church must have more guests in a year than their average attendance for that same year. So he's been listening to our
Yeah,
content, Amy.
thinking the same
Um,
thing.
and he shared that coming out of COVID, the ministry team at Quest has intentionally put some strategies in place to ensure increased attendance. And those strategies included they positioned their online presence as a front door into the church, and they're inviting current attendees to invite their friends and their family members to in-person services. I also asked John what they were learning about how to engage with new people who were previously not connected to their church. And he explained that they're learning to connect to people's hunger for purpose and meaning with the power of a personal invitation. And I thought that's
Yeah.
critical. He said that following COVID, so many people they just seem hungry for more in life. They're looking for purpose, they're looking for meaning in life. And because of that, the Quest ministry team has seen attendees inviting their friends, family, and neighbors at rates they just didn't even see before COVID. And they do use digital and other marketing strategies as well, but that personal invite is now their number one way that people are connecting to their church.
And I haven't met John, but to see success in that personal invitation, to see the rise in that, I have to believe that they have a reliably excellent weekend experience for both unchurched and church people, that it brings, it answers those questions around purpose and meaning. And he's built trust with his congregation that they can invite anytime.
That's exactly right, Amy.
Yeah. Well, I love hearing stories like that. While we're on the topic of ministry reach, Tony, will you talk a little bit about what the data says related to reaching the next generation?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this information, it's not very promising. So when I share the data in a moment, you're going to say that sounds like both good news and bad news. And I'll explain why even the good news may not actually be good news. Here's what the data is showing us. Children's ministry attendance is down 27% for this year compared to last year. And of course, that's on par with the overall decline in in-person attendance. And I think it proves once again that adults drive their kids to church. Kids aren't driving their parents to church. Yeah. But unfortunately, children's ministry attendance is down to 16% of the overall attendance on average. And that's the lowest I've ever seen. And it's been trending lower through the years. Churches, I think, are reaching fewer families with young kids, and young adults are generally waiting longer to have kids. And so I think there's just a lot of compounding different factors that's driving that trend lower, Amy.
Yeah, I was just talking with the church about this. Like, what is a healthy percentage of kids to attendance? And, probably 22 to 25% is what we would say reflects a really healthy. Right before COVID, I think we were averaging about 18%. So it was already a little bit declining, but.
Yeah, that's right. And the good news, which may or may not be really good news, is student attendance has only dropped by 6% from the same time last year. And again, that's compared to that overall 28% drop in overall attendance. So, maybe there are more students that have been inclined to return to in-person gatherings. I think I've heard you allude to that as being kind of the hormone effect in teenagers. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, I thought maybe initially that's why students was rebounding more quickly than children's coming out of COVID.
Yeah, that could be. That may be at play. And maybe churches are just doing a better job at reaching new students than they are new adults. But here's why that good news may or may not really be good news. From our previous research, growing churches have growing children's ministries, and declining churches have growing student ministries. Yep, you heard that right. You want me to repeat that?
Right. Well, and I think it's interesting because that's exactly what the data showed us over the years. Now, growing churches also have growing children's ministry and growing student ministries, but when they stand alone, it really reflected the healthy and unhealthy churches.
That's right. Yeah. And as I've explained, churches that want to be healthy, we don't want our students to go to hell. So you should still have a healthy, thriving student ministry. But I think what the real distinguishing factor here, Amy, is growing healthy, thriving churches. It's the kids ministry. It's those youngest kids, and therefore the young parents, the young adults. That seems to be a key differentiator between growing churches and declining churches.
Yeah, kids ministry is definitely the area to keep your eye on. Do you find any churches, back to these best practices, that are bucking this trend in the data?
Yeah, one of the churches that stood out to me was Victory Hill Church in Scottsville, Kentucky. Chad Hunt is the senior pastor of Victory Hill Church, and actually Amy and I know Chad, because he also happens to serve as a ministry consultant on our team,
That's
works
right.
with a lot of the small churches that we engage with across the country. And at Victory Hill Church, this is phenomenal. Attendance has increased by more than 40% in the last year. And Chad indicated they had 1,300 people for Easter, which was a new attendance record for them. Even going back to pre-COVID days, they had never seen that many people before. They also broke a kids attendance record the 2 weeks leading up to Easter and then again on Easter Sunday. So a lot of momentum around kids. And every Sunday, they have one child for every 3 adults who attend the church. I mean, that's well above that 16% average I mentioned in this quarter's report. I asked Chad what the church is doing to reach so many young families with kids, and he said there are 2 primary reasons that they're experiencing growth. First, the ministry team decided to stop everything that did not speak to or appeal to the person that they're focused on reaching in their mission field. And that person, it's a young adult. It's somebody 25 to 35 years old. They have kids. They're not familiar with faith or with the church, but they're spiritually curious and they're looking for purpose in life and they're looking for a cause for their life as well. Secondly, Chad said Victory Hill Church has become super intentional about creating an invite culture. So their invite strategy is more than just asking the adults to invite their friends. They're also resourcing their kids to bring their friends, which I love that intentionality.
Well, let's shift from ministry reach to ministry connection. This part of the Unstuck Church Report tries to measure some of the next steps of spiritual formation that people are taking at churches. So, Tony, what trends jumped out at you here?
Yeah, so a couple things here. First of all, churches are seeing 82% of their adults and students participating in a group. And by the way, we look at groups as kind of a regular, preferably monthly connection with a smaller group of folks than you have gathering for weekend services, as an example. And so in a lot of churches, these are home groups. Some churches, these may be Bible studies or classes that you're hosting on the church's campus. But the idea is to help people move from big gatherings into smaller group engagement where we get to know each other and encourage each other a little bit further to take next steps towards Jesus. Overall group engagement has increased 6% in the last 12 months. So that's another encouraging sign there as well. Volunteer engagement is returning to pre-pandemic levels, and this is good news for all of us. Churches reported they're now seeing 47% of all adults and students serving at least monthly on a volunteer team, either inside the walls of the church or out in the community. And that's up from 35% the year before. So again, many churches, we're seeing volunteer engagement go down, but fortunately, we're starting to see that pick back up again. And here, a great example is MCI Canada. This ministry, this church is in Montreal, Quebec, and their volunteer engagement increased almost threefold in the last 12 months, which is just amazing. So they've created this culture by entrusting high capacity leadership to volunteers and then adjusting their expectations so that a person who has a family and works full time, they're still able to accomplish the responsibility and have margin in their lives. MCI Canada also seeks to intentionally create space to celebrate people and accomplishments with their teams of volunteers. I mean, they realize that the more they take the time to honor and celebrate people, the more engaged and enthusiastic they are to contribute. Benjamin indicated that the Unstuck process has really helped them to gain more clarity around their staffing priorities because they have more clarity around their ministry priorities. And he explained because of that, they're slow to hire and they don't want hiring to discourage volunteer engagement.
That's so fun to hear an update on how they're doing. They worked really hard throughout the whole process. So great news. Any final thoughts, Tony, before we wrap up today's conversation?
Yeah, again, I hope you find, first of all, the stories that we talked about today to be inspiring, to be encouraging. We've included several more stories from different churches in this quarter's report. And so you might want to just read the report to find out if your church is mentioned in there, just as an example. In case you want to access all the benchmarks, all the trends, and see more of these stories of best practice churches, you can subscribe for free at the unstuckgroup.com/trends. And again, I just want to thank Mortarstone and Leader for helping to contribute to this quarter's report.